What's up everyone, Nathan back with part 2 of my video series on wallbreakers and Crown Tundra at the moment. The other day I put up my video on the top 3 plus my honorable mention talking about who I thought were the absolute best wallbreakers in tier right now. And I alluded to the fact that I took a long time, like a long time, going through Photoshop and creating these matchup spread documents for every wallbreaker that I thought was a candidate to be a top wallbreaker in the tier. And I'm glad I did so because there's a lot of surprise Pokemon that came up, a lot of Pokemon that I thought would be really good, ended up being not so good. And now, to not let my good work go to waste, I'm going to be going through all of these lists. I've got a whole document right here with all, I think we're at 27 now because people requested some more ones that I filled up, but all 27. And we're going to go through it, we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to rank all of them in this tier list right in front of us right here. Couple disclaimers before we start. First is that in terms of the damage calcs I was using to create a lot of these spreads, well, let's pull up one right now. This is Garchomp's. So in order to do the calcs for all these spreads, I couldn't spend forever and do every single variant and account for every single possibility that would be used here. So usually just did something that was as generous to the sweeping Pokemon as possible. So for Garchomp, for example, I think that mcgiron here, if it had more physical defense health invested, that it would be a 2-hit KO for mcgiron. Not sure, this is just off the top of my head, but like usually the most common defensive set. So for example, for Landorus, I wasn't using the Scarf set for most of these calcs. I was using the defensive set. And that's what's being taken into account for a lot of these. So it isn't perfect. In fact, I spotted one the other day. There are actually some mistakes I've made. There's a couple here and there. I'm sure I'll catch them as we go through this. Yeah, on this one, I say that Zapdos is OHKO'd by latios, and I think that's like a 43% chance of that happening. So like, some of them are great, and some of them would give an OHKO if it's like an 80% chance of an OHKO, things like that. So point being, these are just a general idea. And there are going to be some mistakes, I'm sure, but I'm sure it won't be like a massive variance in this system. And another quick disclaimer is that this is, of course, going to be very opinion based. I tried to do this as empirically and as logically and kind of unbiased as I could, but a lot of it comes down to my opinion, of course. You know, when it comes to availability, for example, you could argue that Urshifu should be an A- or a C+, where I put it at like a B+, and just my opinion on how easy it is to get in. Again, I tried to do it somewhat empirically, and if there's a point in its favor, it was upgraded 1 to B+, a point against it goes down to B-, but that's just how I decided to do it. If you disagree, fair enough. And actually, I should mention for a final thing, again, I did add some last minute ones. I did Regidrago real quick, and this morning I also did Garchomp. If there's a wallbreaker that's been left out here, what did I see the other day? Someone on Reddit pointed out Focus Sash and Hillego. Probably pronouncing that wrong. But if that's the case, like, you can do this yourself. There's nothing about the system that I've done so far that is unique. I'm just really just going through the calcs on all the biggest mons in OU right now and talking about it. And again, a lot of the ones I didn't even think to consider, like at the last minute I did Primarina, and it ended up being way better than I expected. And so every time I did one that I thought was not quite fit for OU, it usually surprised me. So I'm sure there'll be some surprise things if you do it yourself. So don't feel like this is objectively the best Pokemon right here. This is just the top 27 that I happen to test. I'd be surprised if there's anything that cracks the top sort of 5 or 10 that I haven't done yet. I did a lot after all. That's enough talk here. I got 27 whole Pokemon to go through, and I really got to get started here if we want to get through this at any decent pace. I'll just do it alphabetically, going through it all. And again, I went through all these on Photoshop and just exported them as quick little PNG. So I hope this is the best way to do so. I'm trying to make sure my camera here isn't in the way, but I think this will work fine. So first is Specs Aegislash. Specs Aegislash, if you look at the spread of damage it does, your first thought is, oh my gosh, there's not a single Pokemon that completely walls it. It should be fantastic, right? Because when you consider that even a choice spec set still runs close combat very effectively and ends up being a very good mixed wall breaker, it's easy to think it's just an absurd Pokemon. But the first problem is a lot of these are 2-hit KOs, and Aegislash are pretty slow. So Hydreigon, for example, here isn't 1-hit KO'd by close combat, and it's faster than Aegislash, so it can come in afterwards and beat you after it gets hit. So that was something I accounted for in a lot of these hard to wall things. So the fact that I get to see, despite it being able to 2-hit KO at least the entire cast, might seem kind of wild. But when you consider that, like, again, you know, what's a better example? Zapdos comes in and can Heat Wave afterwards for a guaranteed knockout, things like that. I consider that a losing matchup, actually. So I made sure to account for that when I was going into my how hard are they to wall category here. In terms of predictions required, it's also extremely bad for Aegislash right now. Shadow Ball is spammable. It's a good move to spam, but it is very reliant on 50-50 to the Shadow Ball and CC. So a Pokemon like Toxapex can come in on Aegislash, and even if the prediction is wrong and they get Shadow Balled, they can just swap out right afterwards to like their Mandibuzz, you know, willy-nilly completely easily, and be fine because it's a regenerated Pokemon, so it'll lose at most like a net 20% in that sort of situation. So not great. The only thing that Aegislash really has going for it is fantastic availability. Ghost Steel is a pretty great typing. Immune to fighting, which Steel types normally fear. It's good defensively too when it's in its shield form. But again, it's slowness is a big factor too. I didn't really get into this too much in my other video, but I think the speed of a wall breaker, at first I thought like, how important can that be? But I think it's actually very important because, for example, if you look at, it can one-hit KO Rillaboom. Rillaboom can't swap in on Aegislash. That's great. But the fact is, you need to get in a situation where Rillaboom's swapping in on you in the first place. Because if Rillaboom's in, I can't go to my Aegislash right there because it'll just knock off and kill us. So it's not great. Whereas if you look at a different wall breaker like your Shifu, or Shifu can come in at any point and be faster than Rillaboom and just start spamming, right? It might get Grassy Glid? That's the way to put it. It might get Grassy Glided on, but it's still just going to knock it out and take it out instantly. So speed isn't an essential part of wall breakers. It's more essential to sweepers, I would say. However, I think that there's a certain amount you need at least to help yourself out a little bit. It is faster than like the big slow walls like Ferrothorn and Blissey and mcgiron and stuff like that, which is useful. But I just think it's problematic that, yeah, you know what, it's great that it can OHKO Latios if it swaps in on it, but that situation is not going to happen. You have to force a perfect situation. You have to make sure that you get in the perfect timing against, like, I don't know, like a Clefable. You have to get it in the perfect spot, and then you can go for your wall breaking thing. So I think that's a huge con against a lot of these slower Pokemons in availability. It was a knock that I gave Aegislash, would otherwise have like just a flat A on availability. Next up we have Cinderace here. Oh, I should probably tier these things actually. So hold on. As I go through this, I'm going to go through the tier list as well. That's important. And I should talk about my grading list in particular, because if you watch my other video, you'll note that I was pretty clear on the 3 categories, which are how hard is it to wall, the second is how many predictions are needed when you're using it, and the third is availability, right? But I think it's also important that I clarify that those 3 are not made equal, right? Because if I look at a Pokemon that has extremely good availability like Heatran versus Pokemon that hits extremely hard like their Shifu Single Strike, I'm always going to be favoring the Pokemon who has the higher base power than availability. Availability is super nice. It's an important category, but they're not made the same. So the way I'm basing it is I'm granting 1 full point for every skill you get on power. I'm granting 75% of a point for predictability and how much predictions you have to do. And I'm granting 50% of 1 for availability, right? So it's a bit of a weird algorithm, if you want to call it that, if I'm kind of gassing myself up here to call it an algorithm. But it did actually, it gave me a good way to grade all the Pokemon. And I kind of did it that way as like, just as a joke. But when I looked at the final results and I looked at everything panned out, it looked fantastic. So I can say that I'm pretty happy with this algorithm, if you want to call it that. So Aegislash was graded pretty poorly for us. It was a C. Again, doesn't really have a lot going for it in this current meta, which is too bad because, you know, it's banned in every other previous meta. But as a choice lock Pokemon, I don't think it has it. You could also talk about some Swords Dance sets that Aegislash can use very well. Swords Dance King Shield kind of takes advantage of its defenses and its offenses. But again, this is long enough as is, so I only looked at 1 set at a time. So another example is actually Garchomp is going to come along later. And I thought that this Choice Scarf set was the best one, that was the one I judged it based on. But it'd be a completely different spread and be completely different results if it was Choice Banded. So I think that's an important distinction to make. So let's move along though. That's just taking long enough as is. We have Cinderace right now. Cinderace is a great example of being hard to wall thanks to its coverage moves. However, it does suffer from 4-move syndrome, which I think is really important, right? So you can't beat Toxapex and Clefable on most sets. Pyro kind of chips down Clefable, but they can always recover it off. You have to kind of choose. It suffers from 4-move syndrome. Not to mention you have to choose between other moves like U-turn is very useful, but then you're giving up something. Sucker Punch gives you priority, which helps its availability, but then you're giving up another coverage move. High Jump Kick is your hardest, biggest hit, and it's really essential for certain matchups like Heatran. But once again, you're giving up on something else there. So perfect coverage isn't really possible with Cinderace. I had to give it some big demerits in that department. But the fact is that it's fast enough to KO a huge chunk of the metagame. The only true walls to it are Slowking Galar as far as I'm concerned, and Landorus, Therian. You can U-turn on these other Pokemon, sure. I'm not sure I didn't put U-turn down for Landorus Therian here. That's one of those flaws, I guess. You can U-turn on all these guys. There's no reason why Landorus in particular walls you. I guess if you want to get into Rocky Helmet stuff. But still, there was some problem matchups, and there are some Pokemon that actually outspeed it. For example, like how it can attack Dragapult, and then most variants are gonna get revenge killed by Dragapult afterwards too, because not a lot of them run Sucker Punch. Well, I'd actually be interested what the usage stats are for that, because I bet a lot do actually run it, so that's hard to say. Predictions required is pretty generous for Cinderace because you're not choice locked, which is a huge boon, and then you can correct yourself afterwards with the second move. However, the first thing we need to keep in mind is that High Jump Kick is important for a lot of these 1-hit KOs and a lot of these 2-hit KOs, and that is already, like, even choice locked or not, that's a gutsy prediction to make, because if someone goes to a Ghost type on that High Jump Kick, then you're gonna terrible position, you're losing 50% of your health. And there are faster Pokemon, like I mentioned with Dragapult. So sure, if you get off a first move, you can adjust with your second move and change the typing. But if it's faster to begin with, which is normally unheard of with a Pokemon as fast as Cinderace, but there are some now that are faster, especially with some Scarf Pokemon. But yeah, just something to keep in mind here. Its availability is pretty great though. It's got a solid typing. It's got heavy duty boots, so it can come in on pretty much any hazards. Its defenses are terrible, but its speed means it can come in on a lot of Pokemon. Again, it can come in on something like Nidoking and can threaten out immediately with the Zen Headbutt. So it graded pretty well for me. Frankly, I see it as a little bit more of a pivot than as a pure wall breaker. That's the thing. This is a pure wall breakers tier list is another important thing to talk about because I said it before, but Pheromosa, in terms of just viability of Pokemon, I think it's absolutely the tippity top here. There's no reason for it to be anything else. But on a pure wall breaker level, it's not quite that good. So in a similar sense, I think Cinderace is better than its tier here as a wall breaker. But in terms of purely grading it as a wall breaker, I will give it an A tier right now. But we'll keep moving along. We will go to Guts Conkeldurr. Guts Conkeldurr is one of the hardest Pokemon to swap into in the entire game. The only Pokemon that completely full stop walls it is Buzzwole, but there are a lot of Pokemon that can come in on one move, like a Zapdos, and then threaten it out afterwards. Again, that's problem with being a slow Pokemon like that. Otherwise, its availability is really strong with good bulk. Its status immune, so you can come in on sleep moves very easily. Dark type being a good swap into Dark type is very good, and actually, Conkeldurr is one of the very few Pokemon in the entire game that don't care about getting knocked off, because if its Guts Orb is already activated, then it's laughing. Predictions required. It's tough because everything comes down to a three-way tie on moves to use between Close Combat, Facade, or Drain Punch, and Knockoff. So it's really difficult. You are given some leeway by being able to Mach Punch afterwards. But, you know, it creates a lot of 50-50s of like Dragonball can come into everything but Knockoff. Toxapex is kind of opposite in that it only gets to a KO'd by Facade, things like that. Knockoff is spammable. There's no one on this entire list besides Conkeldurr itself that likes getting knocked off itself, so it's pretty spammable in that sense. So I gave it a B-. Again, not being choice locked helps, but when you're that slow, you can't really correct a mistake if you predict wrong. So when I actually graded it out and it came out to a concrete score, it came down to A-. Still really strong. It says a lot that this thing was all the way down in RU for a while. It did get banned from RU, but still, in my opinion, like if you're anywhere in like the B's, you're definitely a viable wall breaker, in my opinion, in overused tier right now. So it's still more than viable if you look at it that way. So really surprised me as well. I did it just on a lark and it ended up being graded really well and having a huge amount of Okos across the board. But moving on, we have Life Orb Crawdaunt. Crawdaunt was a problem for me, man. This was a tricky one to judge. The main thing to consider with Crawdaunt is that yes, it hits hard right at the gate, but you can also, if you know an opponent is going to a defensive wall type Pokemon, you can Swords Dance on that and then attack them. And so I really went back and forth on this. I wasn't sure. Do I count that? Do I just say like, no, I'm not doing sweeper sets and that's a sweeper move? But what it came down to was it is a pure wall breaker in the purest sense, in my opinion, right? Where most of the time you're only Swords Dancing if you think a wall is coming in, like a Toxapex or a Ferrothorn. Like if a Toxapex comes in, I know I need to Swords Dance so I can one-hit KO it with Knockoff. Whereas if I just knock off twice, it's not going to do it because it loses that damage after the item's actually being knocked off. And so yeah, by including that, I just ended up lowering some points on it predictions required because that's just the third prediction you need at that point. So instead of Chronic going, okay, do I click Knockoff? Do I click Crabhammer? Now there's a third option. Do I click Swords Dance in case they go to a wall and then attack? So, you know, Toxapex gets graded as it needs a Swords Dance first. Dragonite gets very poorly graded and you need a Swords Dance in 2 hits. Same for Ferrothorn, a lot of that stuff. When you take that all into account, there's not a lot of Pokemon that can wall it actually. Hydreigon pretty much walls it no matter what. For example, though, it can swap into both moves very easily. Even a Swords Dance, well, if you Swords Dance on a Hydreigon swap in, the Hydreigon's still going to be faster and be able to Oko you, so that's a losing matchup. So it was pretty good across the board in terms of offense. The fact is that Knockoff is very spammable, always going to give you a plus in predictions, in my opinion. And again, you're not choice locked and you can correct some stuff afterwards and you can't Aqua Jet after the fact, so it's similar to Conkeldurr in that sense. So it ended up getting a B here. Its availability is what kills it though. It's fragile. If you want to truly hit some pure heights, you need rain in it. I didn't actually account for rain in a lot of this stuff. I should have mentioned that for Shifu Rapid Strike down the line, but that's fine. And he'd set up to beat the walls too though, so it can't just, that's another thing, right? So like, okay, it's all well and good to be able to Oko Toxapex, but the fact is that Crawdaunt needs to get a Swords Dance off first, which means that the Toxapex needs to swap into you. Whereas if you compare that to another wall breaker like Latios, Latios just comes in off the rip and can Oko the Toxapex, right? So it's not the same. So again, I gave it a bit of a worse grade in availability than I expected. It really, C- is about as low as I go on this with the exception of the Regis. because it needs so much setup, but it's still graded out to be a B+. So I think it's definitely still viable. If you're running a rain team, I think it's still great. The fact is that knockoff and crab hammer is a devilish combination in my opinion. But we'll move on to the next one here. Next up, we got Diggersby. Diggersby was surprising me for me. Another RU Pokemon. You see all these RU Pokemon here and you think like, how the hell are they viable in OU? Well, they hit hard, that's how. And Diggersby hits as hard as anyone. It's only got 7 Pokemon that can really give it trouble. It can U-turn as well, which is useful. They don't normally run the U-turn sets. I didn't actually evaluate Swords Dance on this Diggersby. I believe I just did Choice Band to evaluate this is what I opted for. Again, I'm only trying to do as few sets as possible for evaluating these Pokemon because it's just exhausting otherwise. Predictions required is pretty harsh because EQ should be your big spammable move if you want big damage, but you're in a tricky position where there's so many Pokemon that can swap into EQ fine. Whereas if you want to hit Latios or Landorus or Tornadus, you need to read that with a body slam. So that hurted a lot. Anytime you're choice locked, it really, really hurts your predictions. That's the whole reason why I included this category. Because, you know, if there's a single reason why we're not using Diggersby right now, it's because you have to make those huge predictions, in my opinion. Plus, its availability isn't fantastic. Having ground typing is nice. You can swap in on electric type moves, and actually normal typing for Ghost is pretty handy too. There's a lot of ways you can find that to work out, but it's slow, which hurts, and its defenses aren't fantastic. So it ends up being graded as a B, slightly above Crawdont, or no, slightly below Crawdont. Ooh, Diggersby, not as quite as strong. I guess it's just the choice lock factor kicking in there. But next up we got Dragapult. Dragapult really surprised me when I was doing these rankings. I thought Dragapult would be much more of a pivot. I thought it would be not that good, but in terms of hard to wall, if we look at the old classic choice specs Dragapult, if you make the right predictions with Draco Meteor, Shadow Ball, and Flamethrower, you can hit everything pretty much, with the exception of Blissey, with the exception of Clefable and Heatran, and I guess T-Tar and Tapu Fini. That's still like a fantastic spread. And unlike a lot of these Pokemon, like sure, this spread looks pretty similar to Conkeldurr, but Dragapult's so fast that they can always assure the 2-hit KO. So it's really, really hard to swap into if your predictions are on point. However, you're choice locked, which is, again, it's devastating. A lot of these, this is gonna be a common theme for us here. Being choice locked sucks. Again, the classic example is Toxapex swaps in. Let's say we guess right and we Shadow Ball. The Toxapex player goes, okay, it's lost 60% right there. No harm, no foul. I'll swap out to my Mandibuzz in the next turn, and you're still fine. So that's important. You can U-turn, which helps us a little bit with the things that we were walled by, but it's very bad. And again, the fact that you have not just 2 moves to choose between, as like a 50-50, but 3, because the Fire Blast is really important for Corviknight and for Ferrothorn and mcgiron. It's really devastating. So this Pokemon is about as rough as it can get for predictions. The only thing that gave it a plus was there's few Shadow Ball resist. So like it's a pretty spammable move. Your opponent's going to be taking some good damage no matter what, unless they have unless they're quick to go to their Blissey or Mandibuzz. But if they do that too much, then they might be eating a U-turn. In Mandibuzz's case, they might get a 2-hit KO'd by a Draco Meteor. So yeah. And availability, it's right up there. It's so fast. There's a reason why this thing's on everybody's team is because its availability is amazing. Its typing is pretty fantastic. Its defenses are not bad actually. So just yeah, solid A- in availability and a really good wall breaker actually. It's super prediction dependent, which I don't love, but that's still going to be a solid A+ for us. So the best one we've ranked so far. Very good Pokemon for wall breaking, of course. The Hex sets are still good. It kind of leans into that being that pivot more so than the pure choice specs does. But you know, up to you. Next up here we got Garchomp. Garchomp was a last minute ask for. I didn't consider it first because I consider it more of a rocker, and some people consider it sweeper, some people consider it whatever. But after I did that Crawdont thing, and again I explained my struggle with Crawdont and how do I judge that? Do I judge that a wall breaker? Should it be allowed to Swords Dance? Does it open the door? And after I decided that conclusion that I just mentioned, I realized that Garchomp deserves some credit there too. So if you don't know what the shtick with Garchomp is right now, I'll explain it briefly. Garchomp is pretty much the best rocker in the tier right now. It's the best stealth rocker, I think, bar none. And when you're looking at stealth rockers, actually, I want to be looking at this, don't I? If you're looking at stealth rockers and what makes a good stealth rocker, it really just boils down to how do you match up versus rapid spinners, which in this tier is just Excadrill, and how do you match up versus defoggers. So looking at Garchomp's matchup versus defoggers, it's incredible versus Zapdos. It's incredible versus Tornadus. It's not bad versus Landorus. I wouldn't say there's a huge advantage one way or the other. It's incredible versus Moltres. Not incredible, but the fact that we don't have any contacts moves that hit Moltres is pretty nice. You're still getting risky at getting burned, but it's still a pretty good matchup all things considered. Where it's pretty bad versus Corviknight to be fair, but but Corviknight is surprisingly low on the usage stats nowadays. It's, I think, only like the 5th or 6th most common defogger nowadays, and Skarmory isn't even overused right now. So as a result, that's why it's the best rocker right now. And here's the other thing, right? Is so there's lots of Pokemon that beat defoggers, right? Terrakion, if by what I just said, Terrakion is just as good as Garchomp, right? But the thing is with Terrakion is that it attacks the opponent if my opponent, if I set up rocks, my opponent goes to Garchomp on a Terrakion. Terrakion kills him with Stone Edge. No harm, no foul, right? One Pokemon gone. But when Garchomp does that in that exact same situation, it sets up a Swords Dance, it goes for a Scale Shot, and it doesn't just kill the Zapdos, it kills your whole team. Because Swords Dance, Scale Shot, Swords Dance boosts your attack by 2 stages. Scale Shot is a Dragon type attack that can do up to 125 base power. That boosts your speed too. So you can threaten at any point. You know, I could be like, okay, I'm just gonna defog these rocks, no harm, no foul. Uh-oh, I got swept 6-0 by Garchomp, right? So that's why it's so good. It's that ultimate threat. Plus, of course, it runs its tank set very well too. So it made it very difficult to judge from these criteria because, you know, technically, if I Swords Dance and predict the Mandibuzz swapping on me, similar to that Crawdon once again, and I get a 5 hit on my Scale Shot against Mandibuzz, which is only, I think, like a less than 10% chance of happening all told. It's a 15% chance. No, it's a 15% chance divided by 2 because it could be a 4 hit or a 5 hit. And there's also a 10% chance of it missing. So I think it's like a 5% chance of this happening. So anytime you see this big red SD 5 hit Oko, that means it's like you're pretty much hoping for a crit at that point. It's such a low percentage chance of that happening. And if it's an SD 2-hit KO, so with Corviknight, for example, if I have a Garchomp in and I'm thinking they're going to go to their Corviknight straight up on me so they can defog my Stealth Rocks, I can predict that and I can go for a Swords Dance. I Swords Dance, and then I Scale Shot the Corviknight knowing it's a 2-hit KO. But this reduces my defense, and then the Corviknight Brave Birds us with the reduced defense and almost Okos us, and then we take a Life Orb damage. And so then the second hit is probably knocking ourselves out with the Life Orb damage. And again, you're hoping for at least 2 4 hits at this range. So as you can tell by me going super in depth on that example, it's not a very fantastic thing. And the best case scenario is you're pretty much trading with the Corviknight, which again, if we're talking about wall breakers, that's not bad. So I didn't completely judge it against it. It's kind of, again, it's a weird situation where there's Pokemon that can deal with it and some that can't. So I'm not entirely sure, but the fact that it's not choice locked is a benefit for its predictions. However, the fact you need to Swords Dance on a lot of these matchups in order to get the Oko, especially Tapu Fini and especially Clefable, is very rough. And it's also just the most basic level of 50-50 once again with Scale Shot or EQ. And it's fast, which helps, but it's not that fast to make up for it oftentimes. So if I guess wrong on a Zapdos could still get a couple free hits on me. You know, if I guess wrong on Latios, then I'm in huge trouble and I'm in danger of getting Oko'd myself. So it is still a basic 50-50. It's the most basic level. So predictions I was pretty harsh on the thing. But its availability is great. You know, it's a strong defensive Pokemon. It's fast as hell, so it's easy to get going. And its ground typing means you can come in on an electric move. So we graded it pretty well as a result. It is down an A-. I believe it's actually points wise. The points assigned to it ended up being the exact same as my Conkeldurr. So it's about exactly as good as Conkeldurr. But again, this Garchomp ended up being another great example of not being indicative of how viable there as a whole. Because in terms of Stealth Rocker in the tier right now, it's all the way up here. It's the best Stealth Rocker in Pokemon, in my opinion, currently. In overused. But when we're just talking about pure wall breaking, I need a Pokemon that can break open some walls for my other offensive Pokemon, then Garchomp is an A-. Still very strong, but not quite up there. Moving on to our next one here, we have Heatran. Heatran might not seem like a wall breaker to a lot, and I thought it'd be pretty good because it's got good special attack, and if you swap in a Flash Fire, it's extremely strong. And even the counter Pokemon, as you see in the purple here, they can get Toxic, they can get Trapped, which is very useful. I can Toxic them on the swap, I can Protect and do lots of stuff to them. So even the Pokemon that wall him don't truly give him too much trouble. But the fact is, it doesn't hit a lot of crucial 2-hit KOs. It's pretty slow. So sure, you can 2-hit KO or Shifu Rapid Strike, but it's going to just absolutely destroy you afterwards with literally any move. Prediction required. Magma Storm is pretty spammable with the exception of its own Heatran. Literally everything is taking at least good damage from a Choice Specs or a Life Orb Heatran. So that is good. But once again, it kind of comes down to being a 3-pronged prediction choice here, where even if it's not choice locked, the slowness doesn't really matter. Where I need to click Magma Storm or a lot of the cast, but I need to click Earth Power if I want to secure a 2-hit KO on Toxapex. It's a Flash Cannon if I want to get a 2-hit KO on Tyranitar. So it's a really messy situation in terms of predictability. But still, the fact that it's not choice locked and the fact that Magma Storm is never a bad choice ended up being a pretty neutral B as a result. In terms of availability, it's a Heatran. If it's not easy to get in, then what is? The only thing you can put against it is its speed tier is not fantastic. So again, I can't swap this thing in on a Landorus and try to start breaking walls right away. I have to get a good matchup going before I can get my heatran in. So as a result, I graded it as an A-, but still very strong. But in terms of actually grading it here, it didn't do great. It's about a B. Still solid. If you want a wall breaker and you're willing to play into it a little bit, then heatran still can do its job very well. As a rocker, it's still pretty fantastic in its own right as well. As a special wall, it's still fantastic. So it gets a B as a result. Cortana. Now, I might get some hate for this. I realized as soon as I was trying this out that I might get some hate for it because Cortana, Banded, or Swords Dance is extremely good. I literally haven't gone through the thing on anything else. If I treated Swords Dance Cortana the same way I did Crawdaunt, it would probably grade way better than I'm about to grade it. But I just did the most common set when I was doing this the other day. So, you know, hate me if you want. I understand that it's a pretty biased perspective on Cortana specifically, but in terms of hard to wall, this thing has trouble with a huge amount of matchups. There are lots and lots of things that get 3-hit KO'd. There's lots of things that completely wall it. Predictions are about as rough as it gets because the Choice Scarf Cortana is choice locked. There's 4 moves you need to use in conjunction to beat the entire meta. So even if you guess perfectly, first of all, again, Urshifu can come in on one move, realize, uh-oh, I chose the wrong thing here, and go to another Pokemon because it is choice locked. And that's assuming you predict right on all 4 moves. The only thing that gave it a non-C- in predictions required is that you can just spam knockoff very easily with Cortana, which is always going to be good. Its availability is pretty poor as well. While its speed is top tier as a Scarf Cortana, its defenses are terrible. You can't swap it on any move really at all. Even an Earthquake, which is neutral, is almost always killing a Cortana. So graded very, very poorly in that department. And it's actually, again, I'm going to get some hate for this, but Scarf Cortana is my worst wall breaker here. It graded, just when I did the math, when you crunch the numbers, its best thing it had going for it was being hard to wall, and it's not that good in that department. There's 10 whole Pokemon it can't really break. So again, if you disagree with me and you feel that strongly, let me know in the comments, but I'm pretty sure that it would do better with Choice Band and the Swords Dance sets, but I only got to 1. Moving along though, we can go to our next Pokemon here, which is going to be Landorus Therian. Landorus Therian was a Pokemon I thought would do really well in this department. I just did this classic Scarf Lando here, max attack, pretty rough on the prediction department. A lot of it just comes down to 50-50s on EQ and Stone Edge. You need to know when to U-turn a lot of these matchups. If you want to be able to get Latios very well, you have to do a knockoff or 2 a KO. U-turn's probably better in that situation though, which is why I put U-turn here instead. So really not the best in terms of predictions. It might be one of the worst Pokemon on this list. It's either that or Magnezone. This thing also gets knockoff though, so you know this is one of those cases where I'd actually revise this if I had the time to make this a C instead of a C-, because I think you can spam knockoff with this thing pretty easily. But they also run defog instead of knockoff all the time, so maybe you don't even have that. I think defog on Scarflando is not the best, but if you're desperate it works. But that's my little pet peeve on why Landorus Therian isn't that good right now. But yeah, I mean, so technically, you know, it's a B+ on hard to wall. There's not a ton of Pokemon that can wall it, but you have to guess perfectly to do that. It is choice lock, so you can't swap around afterwards. So very problematic. The best thing it has going for it, of course, is its availability. Landorus Therian is ridiculously easy to get in. Flying type is super useful. Intimidate helps, so that even though it's not defensively invested, it works out great. It's got good bulk to start with too, which helps. And being a Scarf user, it's extremely fast. So it's going to be the best graded Pokemon in terms of availability today that we'll see. And as a result, it ends up as a B tier. So, you know, not bad. It's still very usable if it's your dedicated wall breaker, but again, more use as a pivot than I think than an actual wall breaker. Oh my gosh, I have so many left. Oh, what have I done? Why did I do so many of these? I just want to be accurate, but and again, I don't want all this hard work to go to waste. If it's taking me a long time to talk about, imagine how long it took me to get this already, right? So show me some love. I better see some big likes and comments in the comment section here, guys. I need some love for this. Latios, I talked about this in my other video. I was hugely surprised by it. Its availability is no secret to anyone. Extremely high. Hard to wall. I was shocked that almost nothing can wall this thing successfully. Pretty much Heatran is your only surefire bet, because Tapulee is getting 3-hit KO'd and it doesn't have recovery more often than not. Tyranitar, same thing, but you can also trick your specs onto it, crippling it for the entire match. Blissey is a pure wall to it in the same sense that Heatran is. Heatran actually doesn't have recovery too, I should mention, but Blissey is the purest wall you're going to find to it in terms of defenses. However, it gets absolutely destroyed if it's tricked Latios' specs. So that's a pretty good matchup in 2. When it comes to tricking a Pokemon your item, it's tough to decide how much you grade it for, because some people might consider that just as good as knocking out the Blissey because it's completely crippled. But still, that means that Latios is weaker for the rest of the match. It means that Blissey can still do things like it can come in and Stealth Rocks, it can come in and Thunder Wave, it can come in on a sack if nothing else. So it's still not as good as getting a knockout, because it, in a way, I'm not gonna say it cripples your Latios, but it reduces its effectiveness. But yeah, this thing is absolutely perfect as a wall breaker, except for the predictions. It is choice locked. Draco Meteor is spammable, I'll grant, with the exception of fairy types coming in. It's easy to just spam that and just watch things go bloom. Even if they have a Ferrothorn and they come in on Draco Meteor, they're not loving it. I think they're still taking like 2 or 3 hits before they get knocked out from it. Incredibly strong in that sense. But a huge buff to Latios this generation was Sacred Fire. So unlike a lot of Pokemon that got hurt with by losing Hidden Power Fire, Latios got something even better, which is Sacred Fire. Does more damage than Hidden Power. It reduces the special attack. So something like Magnezone, if it comes in on the Sacred Fire, its special attack is dropped too, which makes it less effective and kind of not going to cripple it, but it reduces its effectiveness. So as a result, instead of it being like multiple moves you have to weigh, it's really just a 50-50. Are they going to go to a steel type or are they not? Because that just decides what you click in that situation. And Psychic is also very spammable in terms of like the fairy types that might wall you otherwise. 2-hit KOs almost all the fairies, I guess with the exception of Tapulee. But still, very, very spammable, very good Pokemon. And again, if you click the right move, you can destroy anything. Toxapex gets O-code by Draco Meteor. Like, what else do I have to say? That's insane. So yes, as a result, it will be the highest graded Pokemon so far, and it's going to go straight into the S tier. In terms of my scoring system that I gave for it, it got 16.5 points, which is huge. And it did tie Spectre for the second highest here. But I ended up putting it below Spectre in terms of my rankings, just because I disliked how its 2 big problem matchups are Heatran, T-Tar, and Blissey, which are decently common, whereas the other 2 above it have an easier time with the more common walls. So let's keep moving though. I already talked about Latios before. Magnezone is an interesting one. For this process, if you asked me like how I would rank them, Magnezone would have been top 3 for sure. Its choice spec set was a massive reason why it got banned. However, there's a lot of problem matchups here, right? Look at all this purple. All this purple means that it can't beat them without going for a Volt Switch or without going for a trick. Moltres and Toxapex, it pretty much beats with a Volt Switch because it still hits so hard with its choice specs. But again, it's similar, right? It depends on how much you grade the trick. If you're the type of person who thinks tricking a Blissey is as good as killing it, then in that case, Magnezone only has trouble with like maybe 2 matchups, and maybe it's hard to wall as an A+. But the fact that it can A pivot on its counters and it can B trick them did end up making it still an A. Very, very hard to wall Pokemon all told. And something that I gotta mention about Magnezone actually before we fully get into it is that its counters to its shift gear set are very different from its counters to its spec set. For example, I would probably go immediately out to my Excadrill if I thought the Magnezone was a shift gear set and they're going to set up on me and start going for a sweep. I could immediately just stop that in its tracks. However, what do you know? If it's a choice specs Magnezone, that's probably a bad decision, because how much is Excadrill taking? 2-hit KO? At least half its health. Yeah, it's a 2-hit KO, so it's getting hit pretty hard by it. And then your Excadrill's at like 40% health, which is a disaster. Or maybe even it's getting tricked the specs all of a sudden, right? So the fact that its counters are different with its 2 different sets really helped its grading in my opinion. But the fact is, it is still a prediction reliant thing. You're not sure if you're going to be doing a Volt Switch or a trick or a Floor Cannon. And actually, you know what? I was pretty generous with this thing in the prediction department because I think it is very prediction dependent. I did this early in the process. As I went through this process and did all 27 Pokemon, I got much harsher on the prediction department than I was at the beginning. So this would probably be a B- if I had to do it right now. But in terms of availability, it's about as good as it gets. It's slow, which hurts it, but its typing is the best typing in Pokemon in my opinion, and its defenses are extremely good too. So it's a very easy Pokemon to get in and start breaking walls with. The question is just clicking the right move at the right time, which isn't so bad because again, if they go to Blissey, you get a tricked Blissey, it's a pretty good situation. So it did not quite crack my top 4 like I expected it to. I consider that to be the biggest upset of this whole ranking things, that Meg didn't crack that list, but it is going to be S-. And again, similar to Pheromosa that I talked about in my other video, Pheromosa I think is the best Pokemon in Pokemon right now, and Magnezone I think is a close second, honestly, maybe third, maybe at least top 5. And again, it's because it runs multiple sets very well. It's one of the best assault vest runners. It's a great pivot. It's the top 5 wall breaker. It's a top 3 setup sweeper, right? It can do everything. So as a pure wall breaker though, it is S-, so extremely, extremely good, but just not quite in that upper crust. Let's keep moving here and go to Analytic Choice Specs Magnezone. And this is one of the heaviest hitters in Pokemon actually. This is also early in the process because Ferrothorn can get body pressed, but I guess it's a 3-hit KO. and I guess you don't want to get body pressed back, so fair enough. But almost nothing swaps into an analytic boosted Magnezone move whatsoever. Look at all this green. It's not just 2-hit KOing Pokemon, it is OHKOing. It is popping off and so strong. However, I gave it a really harsh grade in the prediction department because sure, there's only 2 moves to guess between, which does help, but it's just if your enemy has a bulky water and a ground type, it can essentially wall you the entire game if they guess correctly. Magnezone is really tricky to guess around, and it forces these awful 50-50s. The whole reason I started this department of predictions required was because of Magnezone, and it gets a C- there as a result, which really hurts its viability in that sense. But in terms of availability, it's pretty good. It's got a solid typing. Steel is pretty great. It can swap in on flying moves damn near for free with its steel electric typing. And its defenses are decently high, good HP and very high defense. So it does great. It's not like terrible by any means. Like I've been pretty harsh on it so far with that department, but it still gets a solid A tier for me. Again, you know, this is where my rankings do get a bit wishy-washy, I admit. You know, C-, knowing what I know now, I might give this like a C+ compared to some other ones, maybe even a C, because it does only have 2 moves, unlike the 3 moves that a Pheromosa has to juggle, for example. And you can Volt Switch too, which helps on the counters a little bit as well. So I don't know. It's a bit fuzzy here, but I feel strong with it at being just a solid A tier. It's very good at what it does. Its flaws are the prediction department, but it's an extremely good wall breaker. It's impossible to wall if you play it correctly. But hey, let's keep moving here. We'll go to Mammothwine. Mammothwine was another late addition, but it ended up being very good. In terms of being hard to wall, it was one of the best ones that I graded. Buzzwole is the only true easy counter. Even Ferrothorn, it gets 3-hit KO'd eventually. And Moltres can come in on any move, and it can beat you with a flamethrower immediately, but like it's still taking huge damage from an Icicle Crash. So those are the only 3 Pokemon that it can't 2-hit KO extremely easily. Predictions required, pretty rough. Once again, you know, Earthquake and Icicle Crash are damn near a 50-50 in a lot of situations. There's knockoff too, but which you can spam, but I think you're mostly Icicle Crashing. I think you're mostly Earthquaking. So that's pretty rough. Availability isn't great either because it's an Ice type, and I graded this as a choice banned Ice type Mammothwine. So that means you're taking 25% from every Stealth Rock swap in. Very rough. Ground typing helps because you can come in on electric moves. But yeah, I mean, and it has priority Ice Shard actually, so you can come in on, despite being slower than Latios, you can come in oftentimes on it and threaten it out with an Ice Shard. But even then, it creates another prediction in itself, whereas if I swap in on a Latios, do I Ice Shard because they can go to Ferrothorn in that situation, or do I Icicle Crash? Do they stay in that situation? So it's messy in terms of predictions, and that hurt it in the prediction department. It hurt in the availability department, but in terms of being hard to wall, this Pokemon's being good for 4 straight generations just because of that alone. So this is no exception, and it gets graded as a solid A- as a result. Definitely a very strong wall breaker. Same with these guys. Very good, does its job perfectly, no complaints. It just has flaws. It's not perfect. Nidoking, very popular one. This is a surprise for a lot of people that it remained OU after the first month usage rankings dropped. And it's an extremely interesting one because when you think of wall breakers, it's one of the first ones you think of. Sheer Force and Life Orb are a match made in heaven. It's the reason why Landorus Incarnate got banned. And Nidoking does it a little bit worse, it's a little bit slower, but it's got an arguably even better move pool, and it's still like damn strong. Nothing, if everything has to stay in on Nidoking for a long time, nothing can do it very well against it. Its coverage moves are awesome too. It's perfect coverage essentially. Like the only Pokemon it has any true problem against is Blissey, which is fair. But yeah, it's extremely good. Predictions required is tricky because again, it's not choice locked, which helps a great deal. So yeah, you know what? I can guess wrong on Melmetal, right? I can Sludge Wave and Melmetal comes in fine, but that follow up Earth Power is going to completely do huge damage to it. Not quite OHKO it, but like 80-90% there, right? So, but the problem is that it's so slow, right? If Nidoking had like 100 speed or 110 speed, this would be like an A+. But the fact is, if I guess wrong on our Tornadus and I Earth Power when I should have Ice Beamed and it comes in, I'm probably forced to swap out because Nidoking's also pretty frail. Depends on the health situation. That was probably a poor example. But let's say that I Earth Power on the Hydreigon is a better example. I Earth Power on the Hydreigon, I should have Ice Beamed. Well, now I'm forced to swap out. It's as good as if it was choice locked and I guessed wrong there anyways. Because Hydreigon can threaten an OHKO immediately. Its bulk, I gave it great bulk, which is strong wording to be sure. I would give it pretty good bulk if I could edit this right now. Its typing is pretty good. You can come in on fairy type moves pretty easily. You can come in on electric moves, of course, with that ground typing, which is always going to be useful. But you know, it's sad that 80 speed is considered slow in this tier, but frankly, it is. And a slight edit I put here at the bottom is that if you choose to use a substitute set and you don't use flamethrower, that damages your hard to wall category because now all of a sudden Pokemon like Corviknight and Ferrothorn become a problem for you. But the plus side is that your predictions required becomes much better, because now in this situation, I can come in on Magnezone, I can substitute, I don't have to guess whether this Hydreigon is coming in, I can see the Hydreigon coming in, and I can Ice Beam pretty freely. So that's big. So change the grading to, in that case, to a B plus to hard to wall, and a hard B to predictions. So pretty good, because again, even in that substitute example, it's not perfect because I have to predict that they're going to swap in the first place, and I have to predict that a substitute is safe in that situation. So that Mcgiron has stayed in and just attack straight up on that substitute, the Dino King would probably be in some trouble. So there we go. Very good one though. Definitely no question. It's going to be a solid A plus. Actually, just above Dragonbolt. These two were, again, Dragonbolt surprised me with how good as it is a wall breaker. They're kind of opposite in the sense that this is a slow but easy on the predictions wall breaker versus a fast and extremely difficult to make predictions with wall breaker. But they end up being graded about the same as far as my point system went. Next up though, we have the Pheromosa. Pheromosa was my honorable mention. It was just underneath the top 3. Solid S tier. Again, I think it's the best Pokemon in Pokemon right now. It's actually the top of S- is how I ranked it, because it was solidly below these two. But it's the best Pokemon in Pokemon right now. Its utility, heavy duty boots, rapid spin set is ridiculous and hits everything, and threatens sweeps with its beast boost ability too. Its choice spec set is almost never used, but it's still very strong. Its quiver dance set is arguably its best set, and very, very difficult to wall unless you have Pokemon with the right amount of health. And of course, there is the choice band set, which is what I decided to grade it on, because I think that's the best pure wall breaker set. I did a first take of this. Just with the pivot set, because I thought that was the best one. But I looked at myself in the mirror, I was like, what are you doing? The choice band set should definitely be used here. But the choice band set, it suffers from definitely not being hard to wall. Hits hard as just about anything out there, but it's extremely prediction heavy. You have to triple axle on half the meta game, which is difficult in a contact averse meta, because there's contact moves like Moltres, which will completely destroy them with Flame Body, or even if you guess right and you triple axle a Garchomp, if it's Rocky Helmet, then you're probably taking like 50% from that alone. Same goes for Zapdos. And yeah, you have to close combat the other half of the meta game, and you have to drill run on Toxapex. And if Toxapex comes in on the drill run, they can swap it to a Corviknight afterwards because they know your choice locked. So it's a messy situation. I did end up giving it a B because you can just spam U-turn, because its choice band U-turn is so good. But again, that makes the case it's more of a pivot than it is a wall breaker. So I might even go back and make this a B- as a result. Its availability isn't great either. It's extremely fast. It's easy to get in that sense. It can outspeed the entire metagame unboosted, but its defenses are terrible. When you're banded, you're worn down so quickly by hazards, and you're worn down so quickly by Rocky Helmet. So it's rough. But despite that, it's still S-. Ridiculous Pokemon. Let's keep going. It's taking forever. Oh my gosh. But I knew this was going to be rough. If you're still with me, you're a legend, and you're dedicated to knowing about the true wall breakers in the metagame right now. We have Primarina. Primarina was a last minute ad. It wasn't even very high in the viability rankings, but I thought, hold on, this thing was a famously good wall breaker in DLC 1 and pre-DLC metagame, so I should at least give it some ranking. And sure enough, in terms of being hard to wall, it is still up there right now. It's still one of the best Pokemon in terms of being hard to wall. If you guess correctly, very few Pokemon can handle it very well. That is, of course, to get a lot of these crucial one-hit KOs and to get a lot of these crucial two-hit KOs, you have to be hitting Hydro Pumps, which is easier said than done. But yeah, hits super hard. Predictions required, same old stuff. Very prediction dependent. You can spam the hell out of Scald, which is easy to do, which helps the predictions department, but it's weak, and you're not hitting any of these crucial one-hit, two-hit KOs as a result. Availability, its typing is pretty strong. Water Fairy is very good. Tapu Fini makes great use of it. You are pretty weak to status, which Tapu Fini doesn't have to worry about with its ability, but still very strong. You also, depending on what set you run, you can't get hidden behind with a substitute, which is huge if you happen to run into a Suicune for whatever reason. But it is slow. Same thing. So you grade that to be a neutral B in terms of availability. And I give this one a surprisingly high ranking of just a pure A. Same with all these ones, just very solid. If you need a wall breaker, they're going to do the job very capably. Some are more prediction heavy than others. Again, these guys are kind of opposite in that Cinderace is not for that prediction heavy, but it has some problems breaking through some things, whereas these two can break through virtually anything if you predict right. So again, pick your poison. That's what I like about this, is that if you disagree with my methodology, someone said in the Reddit comments, that I had too many choice locked Pokemon and I graded them too highly. And fair, you know what? If you want to say, you want to bump up every Pokemon that isn't choice locked, if you think the prediction department is that important, then yeah, fair, go for it, absolutely. I will not chagrin you on that. The problem is a lot of these Pokemon is just, you still kind of have to make predictions even if they aren't choice locked. So it's, yeah, but anyways, Primarina was great. Let's get on to the next one here. Regieleki, I did just on a lark. Again, I thought it might be the same case as Primarina where it was surprisingly good, but it really wasn't. This thing's more of like a very conditional setup sweeper. We have to set up conditions for it perfectly. As a result, its availability is the lowest grade I gave, which is F, where it doesn't just get points. I actually subtracted 2 points from it because it's next to useless if you don't give it like really good setup opportunities. In terms of 1-hit KO scenarios, it's fantastic. Almost nothing can wall it very well at all, even if you're an electric resist. And in terms of predictions, like you don't have to predict it at all. You're just clicking rising voltage 99% of the time if it's that sort of set. And it's not that easy to wall too. There's only a couple Pokemon that wall it. So it's very, very good at what it does, but its availability is just F tier because you need the ground types gone or else you're going to go to it willy-nilly every time, no question. Its bulk is terrible. Its typing is terrible defensively. It's as bad as a wall breaker can get in terms of availability. It might be even worse than that Charizard I mentioned in my example video yesterday. So as a result, Regieleki still, it's not bad actually, it's decent. It gets an A-. It does the job actually pretty capably because again, in those first two departments, it's so good. There's no guesswork and it breaks everything, but it just needs a ridiculous amount of setup first. Next up, we have another surprise result for me, which is actually going to be Rillaboom. Rillaboom I thought would be huge in this. I thought it'd be a fantastic wall breaker. But it turns out its viability is more a secret as a combination of Grassy Glide being hard to deal with, in addition to being really hard hitting. And it's actually pretty prediction heavy too, because you need to know when to knock off, when to U-turn, when to Woodhammer. There's a lot of situations where, you know, sure, I can get a Rillaboom in on a Swampert and threaten it out with a Woodhammer, but like, what do they go to that case? Do I click a knockoff in case they go to Melmetal? Do I click a Woodhammer in case they actually, you know, double surprise me and go to Slowbro instead? It's decently prediction heavy, but knockoff and U-turn are spammable, so it ended up getting a neutral B. In terms of being hard to wall, it did terribly. Very big surprise to me. It was probably graded the worst in the hard to wall category of anyone that I evaluated with this whole process. You have to U-turn on a massive amount of Pokemon, and even Moltres and Zapdos, you can't even knock off, you can't even U-turn because you're risking getting status by them. So it really struggles. I did give it some points again because U-turn and knockoff do help with your counters, but in terms of availability, it has got okay defensive typing. Its speed and defense aren't really doing it too much use. However, its priority helps it a lot and gets it a slight B+. So it's not terribly graded as a result, but I was surprised. I thought this would be a higher tier Pokemon, but I guess it just goes to show that its viability is not a secret of wall breaking, but more of the many different things it brings to the table here. So again, B does not mean it's an incapable wall breaker by any means. It just means that it's not its strong suit per se. Moving along though, we have next Spectre. Spectre was my second overall best wall breaker. Nearly impossible to wall unless you have a specially defensive dark type or unless you have a Blissey. But it's very easy to double switch around these things, right? So like if I get a Spectre ending on my opponent, I know they're going to one of these Pokemon because if they don't, they're risking losing the game. To make a double switch of my own to go to a Shifu or something, and now I'm really in a good position, right? So predictions required are pretty easy as a result. You're not really clicking much besides Shadow Ball with Choice Spec Spectre. And even then your double switches become pretty lenient because there's so few things that swap into it nicely. In terms of availability, its defenses are very poor, but that's kind of mitigated a little bit by being very fast. And Ghost typing isn't the worst in terms of like having a defensive ability. You can come in on fighting type and normal type moves. So sure, but I did also give it negatives because it's better the less normal and dark types there are in the field, right? If you happen to run against a Heliolisk on the ladder for whatever reason, well, all of a sudden your Spectre becomes significantly worse. And it's getting worse as it goes on because people are realizing this and they are building around Spectre in their teams, as they should. But like, again, it's hard to judge in that category because when a Pokemon is so meta warping that it actually successfully warps the metagame, what do you do about that? I tried to be like as impartial as I could, but still, it's hard to judge this thing as anything. But I think if you said Spectre wasn't at least a top 5 wall breaker, you would be crazy. I graded it as the second best overall. You can argue where exactly that fits, but I think it's at least very strong. And not to mention in terms of being a setup super threat, it's also right up there. And it's also very good at other sets too. Its Hex Substitute set is extremely good. Hex Disable has getting some usage nowadays. It's very fun. Scarf is very useful too. You could argue that I should have done Scarf instead. It might be kind of BS that I graded this on Specs and Cortana on Scarf. So this is a biased rankings. It's terrible, I guess. That's what we've revealed in all this. But anyways, at least as far as that went, it got a B+. Or no, got a S, just a straight S. Next we have Tapulee though. Tapulee was another big surprise for me. I kind of slept on it. I didn't play a lot of Gen 7, Gen 6. I played enough, but I didn't know just quite. Wait, it wasn't in Gen 6. What am I saying? That goes to show how little I played it. But yeah, it's ridiculously hard hitting. Psyshock means that you can't even be walled by special walls. So it's truly fantastic. And Fairy Psychic is decent coverage when you add a Mystical Fire there. So really handy. The only Pokemon I think I had trouble with walling, with breaking a wall, was Tornadus Therian, which is really kind of sus, honestly, because Tornadus Therian can come in with Spec set, and it can revenge kill Tapulee afterwards because it lives any Choice Specs move with full health. But like that is such a fringe. Like I hesitate to call that a counter, maybe a soft check. So if you wanted to change this to it literally is unwallable if you choose correctly, then I would not disagree. It might be in this first category, it's probably the best in this entire tier. But the caveat is its predictions required. It's choice locked. As I said, all 3, if not all 4 moves are frequently needed. You need Moonblast for the dragons, you need Psyshock for the special walls, you need Psykick for Toxapex and a lot of the standard Pokemon, you need Mystical Fire for the steel types, so you need all 4. The only reason that I didn't give it a C- was that all of these moves are pretty spammable. If you're swapping into things that get OHKO'd by Moonblast, I think you are playing with fire. Psyshock and Psychic are very spammable with the terrain up. It does huge damage. Even Ferrothorn is taking a lot of damage from a Psyshock underneath Psychic terrain. And not to mention, if you're spamming Mystical Fires instead, again, it makes it really difficult to swap into because you're getting that special attack drop too. So that's worth noting. Like if you predict wrong and I Mystical Fire the Latios, okay, sure, I screwed up there, but the Latios is still less effective as a result, and I can swap around that Latios more easily as a result. Availability, it's got solid speed. Fairy typing is a great ability to have. It's priority immune, so you can't even get sucker punched. So it's really wonderful as a result in that department too, and I got an A-. Arguably an A, but its defenses don't quite warrant that. I wouldn't consider this a defensively strong Pokemon. It's just an easy Pokemon to get in and find ways to get it in. So yeah, it was definitely one of my big surprise Pokemon. I didn't expect it being this highly ranked, but it is just outside the big boys as an S-. I think there is a divide here between the Mcgiron and the Pheromosa, but I think it's just underneath. It's one of the best wall breakers in tier, absolutely, but it's also perhaps the most dependent on strong predictions. Of this upper crust, it's easily the most reliant on good predictions. It's not the most reliant on predictions out of everyone because, again, you can spam psychic moves, you can spam Mystical Fire pretty easily, but if you want to get the most out of it, you're gonna have to be guessing correctly is the problem. So that's the only reason that's keeping it out. If not for that, if there was easier or more spammable options, I could see it being right here instead. But as it stands, I'm pretty comfortable with the bottom of S- tier right now. But we're almost done here. Let's get going. We're at Tornadus now. Tornadus, this is another case where it was similar to Swords Dance Garchomp and it was similar to Swords Dance Crawdont, where I had to account for its Nasty Plot set, because sure, under normal conditions, Tornadus has a lot of trouble with Blissey, but if you Nasty Plot and you have Life Orb and it takes Stealth Rock Chip, it can 2-hit KO it with Focus Blast. And so if the Blissey is dumb enough to stay in and not spam softballs on you in that situation, you can beat Blissey. So like a very realistic situation is you have Rocks up, you go to Tornadus, and you Focus Blast and they swap to Blissey, which is a fair play on your opponent's part. And your opponent goes, okay, I should be pretty good to Toxic right now, or Seismic Toss, right? And then you do hit the 2 Focus Blasts, which is a coin toss, I admit, that's pretty hard luck to get. But like, so you can beat Blissey. I had to account for that as a scenario, in my opinion, in those rankings. The only Pokemon that it truly has trouble with are Tapu Fini, but it gets chipped down. Slowking can also get 2-hit KO. Dragonite, kind of, but if you break the multi-scale, it helps a lot. Zapdos does truly wall it. There's nothing that Zapdos can do, and Zapdos won't let you set up a Nasty Plot on it because it will just smoke you right away with Thunderbolt. So in the predictions requirement, the fact it's not choice locked helps a huge amount. That brought it to A tier. The only reason that I brought it back down to an A- tier was, again, there are some Pokemon you have to make a prediction they're going to swap in on you, and you have to Nasty Plot. Hard to wall was definitely its worst category, and that's the most valuable category with my grading system, so that's the only reason it's not that highly ranked, because in these two, of course, it's fantastic. Availability is about as good as it gets. It's fast, it's got decent defenses, it's got a very strong typing defensively. Regenerator means it can come in and out extremely easily, so it's one of the better availability mon in the game right now. Could have even made an argument for A+ on this, that's fair. But yeah, it's not quite strong enough to hit our criteria. Again, it's almost, if you want to make the case that's more of a setup sweeper, that is completely fine by me. But even as a result, despite that, just its availability and its ease on predictions means it's still an A+ Pokemon. So it's just underneath these two, I think. but it's kind of a good mid-ground between the two, where you don't need to be a goat at predictions, and it's fast enough that to kind of ease your sweeping afterwards too. So very, very good Pokemon. Easy A+ rank for me. Let's go on to our next one here. Where are we at? T-Tar. Okay, T-Tar, I thought Banded T-Tar would be amazing. I've always been a huge fan of Banded T-Tar. Pre-DLC 1, it was a menace. It was hitting so strong. It was such a great combination with sand offense. But when I looked at how hard it was to wall, it did very, very poorly. There are quite a number of Pokemon that can swap in on one hit and then threaten it out afterwards. For example, a Garchomp can take any hit that a Banded T-Tar throws at it, and it's forced out afterwards as a result. Same thing goes for Heatran, depending on what speed tiers everyone's hitting, but Heatran should normally be faster. So it's pretty easy to wall all things considered, which is disappointing because I thought that Rock Dark dual typing would really do it. The good news is that those two moves are pretty spammable, even if you guess wrong. For the most part, they're pretty good moves to be just throwing out there willy-nilly. But it does make things easy to swap around, because even if you Stone Edge or Crunch on a Toxapex, they can go to that. Once again, then they can swap out afterwards to the appropriate Pokemon. Its availability, I would actually, once again, I'd probably make this a B+ if I had to judge it by my current standards, because it's got fantastic special defense. It's got good defenses in general. Its typing is pretty good. You know, you're so weak to earth ground moves, and you're so weak to fighting type moves, it might seem terrible. But there's a lot of things that you can resist pretty well, like flying, like psychic, like things like that. But it is pretty slow. So maybe a B+ in the availability category. It's not going to really affect my rankings much either way, so I'm not going to change that. In terms of rankings, it did do very poorly. It was right around the entire Aegis last year. Again, if you're a wall breaker and you're having trouble breaking open walls, I hate to break it to you, you're looking at C tier. These are pretty much our only 3 Pokemon that I said were unviable at wall breaking. Unviable is a hard word, but they're not quite hitting it. You'll notice it wasn't a B- or a C+ tier, because I thought there was a pretty huge gap between, you know, all of these 4. They're very good at what they do. I think they are still extremely capable wall breakers, whereas these guys, I just think struggle. They struggle. Their strengths lie in other areas. Cortana is a Scarfer. It's not a wall breaker. T-Tar is a great support Pokemon. It's not a wall breaker. Aegislash is a defensive pivot. It's not so much a wall breaker. So they're not bad Pokemon. Is what I'm trying to emphasize here. Let's keep moving though. Let's keep moving. We got 4 left. I'm almost done. Ding dong, the vid's almost done. What are we looking at next here? We got Urshifu finally. First, we're gonna do Rapid Strike. So Rapid Strike is an interesting case, because I kind of wish I graded this on. I should have done 2 of these. I'll admit, I'm doing this right now. I'm not going to re-record this, but I should have done 2 different versions of the spreadsheet. One in rain and one without. In rain, of course, would obviously take a big hit to availability, but it would get a huge boost to hard to wall and huge boost to predictions. So I do regret that. However, let's just talk about it in terms of without rain, where it's still solid. That's the thing. In rain, it's way more viable and it's way stronger than it is outside of rain. But even without rain, it's still an A- in hard to wall. If you click the correct move and you click close combat you're supposed to, and you click surging strikes you're supposed to, you're destructive. You're so strong. There's almost nothing that can wall you. A- and hard to wall. Availability, strong too, because it is a strong priority move in Aqua Jet. It's got a solid speed, same as Urshifu. So it's actually got an A- and it's even better than Urshifu in the availability department, thanks to that extra priority. The problem is predictions required, because not only is it a 50-50 on whether you should be clicking surging strikes or even U-turn, but most importantly, close combat and surging strikes. But the weight of that 50-50 is much greater, because if you screw up and if you surging strikes on Ferrothorn, it's next to dead. And if you screw up and you surging strikes Zapdos, you're getting paralyzed. Well, even then, that's probably your right decision in that case, because close combat's even worse and it's not an OHKO. You know, if you surging strikes on Moltres, sure, if you get super lucky, it'll OHKO it and it won't get burned, but odds are it is getting burned. So it's just much more flawed than Urshifu. There's a reason why Urshifu is easily in the discussion for one of the most bannable Pokemon in the current metagame, and Urshifu Rapid Strike is just kind of like a good rain wall breaker. So again, I do regret, frankly, I'll fully fess up, this is kind of incomplete because it really should be judged as a rain wall breaker, but well, what are you gonna do? Let's go on to regular Urshifu, who I graded yesterday. Oh, I didn't even rank Urshifu Rapid Strike. Hold on. Yeah, Rapid Strike was an A-. Still very solid. Very good at what it does. Very solid. And then, yeah, now we got Urshifu Single Strike, who I did grade as the best wall breaker in Pokemon. It fit every category. When I was thinking of the descriptions, I was often thinking of Urshifu and how good it is at these. It's very lenient on predictions. Sure, you can make the case that there's lots of places where you want to U-turn, like on Feeny and Buzzwole. There's cases where you want to Iron Head. There's cases where you want to close combat and cases where you want to do a wicked blow. But the fact is, if Urshifu had literally one move in the metagame, which was wicked blow, I'm not even exaggerating, it would still be very good. If it only had two moves, which is wicked blow and close combat, so you had close combat to kind of establish, hey, don't go to your dark types too much. Be careful about that. If you just have those two moves, it is 95% as good as it is right now, right? Because same thing as the Spectre, it is very easy to make predictions around them going to Buzzwole and they're going to Clefable. If you have Future Sight support, they're not even counters, then you're truly unwallable. The fact that you can U-turn on them, I say is a plus, because if it's very obvious you're going to go to one of these two, you can make a prediction and U-turn out and get a better wall breaker in that situation, like a Magnezone or whatever. In terms of hard to wall, one of the better ones I graded, it's essentially Intimidate immune because of the constant crits with Wicked Blow. You can U-turn the counters. Nothing can really swap it on you safely if you guess correctly. Even Clefable, which is again pretty much the best Urshifu counter, gets Iron Type 2 KO'd. It's ridiculous. In terms of availability, nothing really standing out for or against it in my opinion. You could make the case, again, this is up to your own opinion. You can make the case that it being Psychic immune is really big. I don't know. I think the fact that it's weak to fighting types kind of equals that out. So I'm indifferent on its availability. I just gave it +1 for being fast, which is always useful. You know, you can come in on a Nidoking and threaten it out with a Wicked Blow immediately. That's pretty useful. But yeah, it's the best wall breaker in Crown Tundra. I talked about it yesterday. I think there's a little discussion maybe made otherwise. While it's not the best Pokemon in the metagame right now, it's probably third or fourth. It is certainly the wall breaker because that's what it does. It's a wall breaking Pokemon. So moving along, we have only a few left. Victini was the last minute add, and I'm glad I did it because it's super good. It's not so good in terms of breaking walls. You do have Trick, which is pretty useful if you trick a band to something. I'd actually rather have a Blissey with a Choice Band than with a Choice Scarf or a Choice Specs. So a band can be pretty useful to trick to something. It's U-turn, it's really hard too. So again, it's hard to wall knowing that even if you go to the correct Pokemon on it, it could get Choice Banded, it could get U-turned on. And the combination of Bolt Strike and the combination of V-Create, one of the strongest hitting moves in Pokemon, is pretty devastating. V-Create is really spammable. There's not a lot that love swapping into it for starters. You know, even if you have a truly great counter to it like Tyranitar, it's still a 3-hit KO. It's just that strong. It's Choice Lock, sure, which isn't great. You know, you can go to Toxapex and scout the Bolt Strike and then swap out to something out afterwards. So it did get an A- in terms, it did lose 1 point in terms of predictions. But the fact is, most of the time, you're always going to be clicking V-Create. Availability, though, is really good because it's got good defenses. A-, that's not right. That's not right. Fire typing alone means that you're taking 25% from choice rocks, from stealth rocks. Sure, it's very fast, and sure, it's got good defenses, but this should be like a B+. But anyways, it's still good availability is the point of the discussion. Its only flaw in its availability is its being weak to stealth rocks, which is a significant one. So maybe a B+ in that category instead, but I still grade Victini rather high, actually. I'm going to give it an A. I think it's completely slept on as a wall breaker in the current metagame. The fact is, it's similar to Magnezone in that there's few things that can wall its main stab, V-Create, or Floor Cannon, and you can actually U-turn or Volt Switch on the counters. You can Trick on the counters. Bolt Strike gives it perfect coverage for most of the metagame. So I think it's just like a kind of a discount Magnezone in that sense, which is pretty good. So if Magnezone is important to your team and it ends up getting banned at some point in the future, take a look at Victini. It could be pretty good for what you're looking for. And finally, I will finally be free from this long video, longest one I've ever done by far. But it's going to be Regidrago for a final one here. Someone requested this and I had to include it because it's like one of the perfect examples of a wall breaker in Pokemon right now. Its Dragon Energy, which is dependent on its health, is a ridiculous nuke that's almost nothing can handle. In terms of like the amount of one-hit KOs it gets, it's probably the best out of everyone we've graded so far. Like, look at all this green on this screen right now. Absolutely insane. However, oh, what have I done? However, its availability is what holds it down because it's certainly not being hard to wall. It hits a lot of things. As long as you're not a fairy type, essentially, it's really hard to wall. Even especially defensive steel type like Heatran is still 3-hit KO'd from Dragon Energy. It's just that strong. Like, we're talking about comfortably 2-hit KOing Blissey, 1-hit KOing Clefable, 1-hit KOing Toxapex. If given the right opportunity, nothing is hitting harder than this Regidrago. And as a result, the moves that you're clicking are completely predictable too. You're only clicking the Dragon move. Maybe you click Pulse, maybe you click Meteor, maybe you click Dragon Energy. It doesn't matter. You're clicking a Dragon move. Your predictions are extremely easy. The only question predictions are, maybe I get a Regidrago in, and it's very obvious my opponent has to go to Mcgiron then, and then make a double switch on my Exegel to beat it. maybe you do that. So I'm going to give it like an one minus point instead of an A plus on predictions required. It's just a pure A, but still, it's as easy as it gets. It's even got good bulk too, which helps its availability. However, that's the only thing that helps its availability, because to take full advantage of this thing, you have to get rid of fairy types. You need to make sure you have full health, because all these one-hit KOs are contingent on you having max health Dragon Energy, because Dragon Pulse and Dragon Meteor do not get the same crucial 2-hit KOs, and certainly not the same crucial 1-hit KOs. You do need Dragon Energy with full health. So that means you have to keep Stealth Rocks off the field the whole game. It's similar to a Charizard in that respect, where you have to keep Stealth Rocks and all hazards off the field. It can't get chipped. So you can't swap in on like a Cinderace Pyro Ball and then attack it afterwards, because the range of the Oko is going to be reduced. Actually, I guess in that example, it was probably still Oko Cinderace. But even then, you can't do that because availability is not great in the speed department too, because Cinderace would be able to 2-hit KO you in that scenario too. So it's pretty bad. This might be the worst Pokemon we've seen in terms of availability. It's either it or Regieleki. You need so much support for this thing to pop off. But again, as these two categories suggest, if you get the right conditions, it's unwallable, and it's the ultimate wall breaker in that sense. So it's a very harsh how it works out. You could also do Dragon Dance sets in this thing, of course, but in terms of a wall breaking, you can't beat the Choice Spec set. And as a result, it's going to be graded even worse than Regieleki, because I do think it's a little bit harsher on setup, and I also think it's a little bit less effective as a sweeper too, and you can't get in with its speed as well. So it is worse than Regieleki, but it's one tier below at a B+. Still very good at what it does. It's still, competent, but it just needs so much ridiculous setup. But hey, as a result, I can click save and download. I can title this. I'll do that afterwards. What am I saying? But that's it done. I'm finally free. My throat is raw. I think I need to drink honey after this. I feel like the voice actor for Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm gonna die. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, let me know below. Again, if you're pissed that I, didn't include someone, don't be, because you can always do this yourself. This is a very simple process that I did to make these rankings. You can go to tierlistmaker.com and you can make your own list as a result if you actually want to just use this exact same setup I have and to rank them differently. If I said something wrong, like I said that Landorus, Therian, Oko's Conkeldurr and it doesn't, I mean, again, I went through this all pretty quickly, so cut me some slack. I'm not that smart, so talking about Pokemon for an hour and a half is hard the best of times, but when it's something that's information dense as this, it's pretty rough. So cut me a little bit of slack, but apologies aside, I hope you did enjoy. If you did, consider liking, subscribing, maybe leave me a comment. Let me know what your favorite wall breaker is. That's gonna do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Take it easy.